Hello and welcome to Podsongs, where we interview inspirational people in service to others as inspiration for a new song. Today, our guest is the writer and journalist, Johann Hari, and today's host is the musician, Corey Kilgannon. Hello, Corey.
Hey, how's it going?
How you doing?
Oh, good today. Real good.
Yeah, you're in Florida, yeah?
That's right. Yeah, Neptune Beach, a little sleepy beach town near Jacksonville.
Yeah. And you grew up there, yeah?
I did, yeah. A little south here, but yeah, Florida kid at heart. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, but you've been everywhere. I mean, you've toured. I was reading your tour schedule, and it's.
yeah,
I was tired reading it.
yeah. I got real tired. Yeah, before 2020, I spent a lot of time driving around, playing shows. Got to see most of this country and a few others. And yeah, it was nice to slow that down and then actually stop it completely. It's not really one of my primary interests at all anymore to
Oh,
travel
really?
and music. No, yeah, it was never super sustainable. It made a lot of sense in your young 20s as like chasing a dream. But now I much prefer to just be home. Yeah, work on
Yeah, I did the
music.
same thing. I drove once around America and across Canada, and I visited 40 countries as well. And
Wow.
yeah, I did a real solid 2 year stint and played a lot of house concerts and just, yeah, you get burnt out, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
You give so much of yourself, and yeah,
Mhm.
but it's a good training stint.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, if it's in there for you, if the desire is there, you gotta do it for some amount of time. But um, gratefully, I just kind of reached a satisfaction. I mean, I still like to travel, but
Mhm.
just I don't need to do it as much.
But did you start when you were 14? Is that?
Not traveling. I did my first tour after I graduated high school, so I would have been 17, about to turn 18.
Still pretty young.
Started songwriting, by 13, 14, making records with a friend and doing all that. So, yeah, it'll never stop. It's cool that no part of the changing of the approach at no point was it like, oh, I'm not going to write songs and record anymore. That's always been like a given. It's just a part of life. So yeah, but
Oh,
just less and less interested in pursuing the sort of business side of that and all that entails. And,
yeah, yeah,
more content to just write songs and throw them on the internet and see what happens. Kind of
yeah.
play
That's
play
great.
play locally, be plugged into the community. That's
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen you go through an evolution. I mean, I was watching, videos of you, like a baby compared to now. It's like,
yeah, definitely. And I haven't been putting out. I feel like probably the last 2 3 years has been the quietest I've been. Not that I
mhm.
haven't put some things out, but so I do feel like I've changed a lot since I was interfacing regularly with
Mhm.
the internet and, you know, people that are following along with what I do. So
Mhm.
trying to catch people up to speed now and start posting a little more, but mostly it's just, yeah, enjoying the quiet.
You sound, I wish I was as relaxed as you sound.
Well, my day job, I got into doing these Tibetan singing bowls too. That's kind of what I do.
For a
Uh,
day job.
yeah, look, I'm flipping
Moly.
through my wall of bowls here.
Oh, beautiful.
So I'm in my studio now, and I bring people in and kind of focus on like meditative instrumental music and things like that. That's what I spend most of the day doing now. So it's changed my temperament a lot, slowed my blood pressure down a lot.
Holy moly.
I
I've
just
got to get that. I
moving
got to get
forward.
that job.
Come through. Yeah, no, it's I always recommend it too to musicians, because um, it's just so effective, like the treatments and the different things you can do, and it's really fun. And I know 100 people that are trying to make it as an artist and just spinning their wheels, and it's like, man, if you
Mm.
can find sort of a side profession that's still in music that keeps you satisfied and keeps rent paid, and then yeah, but at least for me, it was that whenever I was full time musician, it, and I love what you've done, because you've created this kind of other outlet. It's just like, I could never be a full-time songwriter. Songs always come off in the margin. They just show up some morning when you're not looking for them. If you sit there every day and you want to write a song, yeah, you might, but it's usually that. For me, it's never the good ones. You know, the good ones kind of sneak
I
up.
really hear you. Yeah, because it's for me, it's the higher self. What I've learned from spiritual studies is you have a higher self and a lower self, and the lower self can learn the skill, you know, and to you know, the chord structures and that what how the lyrics. But you need the higher self, the inspiration, and that you can't force that, and that
Right.
and the people that I've let to do it every day, you know, they get very repetitive, takes the joy out of it, and the results are pretty shitty.
It can be. Yeah. Yeah. Like, that's a great, you know, and so just making sure you're living a life where, you're working on it's like keeping the instruments literally, but also, you know, metaphysically, staying in a place where you're able to tune in to those songs when they do arrive, but then spending a lot of time working on the higher self stuff too, you know, reading the books and doing whatever sort of holistic or spiritual practice kind of keeps you upright,
Yeah,
smiling and breathing. Somewhere along the way, songs show up, and then you just go from there.
beautiful.
Cool
Yeah, what
stuff.
because I was reading your latest bio, and it's it said sound healer, so I wanted to ask you that about that, but it also says death doula. So what?
So that's been a funny. I've thrown that title on my name, although I have to admit that I haven't done a lot of the work in that field quite yet. But I took a long, like a 12-week course on this, sort of being able to sit with people kind of towards the end of their life, be that old age or like in the hospital or anything. And I'm still, you know, it's hard once you get the certificate. How do you get a job doing that? So I've kind of just been letting it process organically. I've gotten to bring the singing bowls, but a guitar, and just, it's really it can mean 1,000 different things. Some people that do that are really into the logistics, and they actually go and they help, like, take care of all the final affairs when we reach the end of our life. There's a lot of logistics, paperwork, and stuff like that. For me, I just want to be able to go kind of meet with people that are in that spot and have a conversation, play a few songs, hit a few singing bowls, and bring a sense of peace. You know, it's as I studied it, and studying different religions and all of it. It's so much of our anxiety. Like, if you really strip everything back, all the context, the root is that ultimate fear of the only certainty, you know, that life must end, and it will end. And it's not fun to talk about, but and I don't sit in it. It's almost like funny, because now that I've done all that work, I think I almost think about death less often than I used to before. I was always kind of fixated and obsessed. And it's like, if you just give it a little bit of your time and attention, you can sort of come to peace with it, and live a little differently, with like an acceptance, you know, of like, it's not, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not, you know, a judgment or a failure when we reach the end of our lives. It's just the most natural thing in the world. So yeah, I've done a little bit of it, not a ton yet. I'm still kind of building my outlook, and you know, the last thing I want to do is create a business for it. So it's kind of, how do I put myself in a position where people are aware that I'm willing to show up and do that? That's what I've not really known quite how to do yet, but I'm working on it.
Wow, that's brilliant. I mean, I've had friends had a doula, but it was always for the beginning, not the end. Yeah,
Right. So,
they really help. You know, that's guiding you through a
yeah,
process like that. And
yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
We had, I mean, that's one of the things I did with this podcast as well. I wanted to be about interview people in service to others, and usually it's the guest, you know, but not usually the musician, because usually we're very selfish people. You know, we usually
Yeah,
we want to be on stage. I read that also in your bio. For you, you admitted to beginning, you know, in the early days, you want recognition. You want to, you know, you want to be on stage. You want people to applaud. I mean, that's a kind of a base motivation, but once you've had that many times, it gets a bit, you know, the novelty wears off, and so now with this project, we can write a song for somebody like Johan, who's helped a lot of people with with his writing, you know. So, but you're unusual in that you're a musician and that you're also clearly motivated in service to others, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, I love attention too. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, me too.
they're both allowed to exist. But
Yeah.
I found that uh, in that like that pursuit of touring and shows and whatever, just slowly over time, it kind of having an imbalance in that
Yeah.
really eroded the love for music. And I found myself on stage at some of the best gigs that I've ever had the opportunity to do in my life, just hating every second of it. Like, what?
Mm.
This is what I thought I wanted. What is it? And, I think it's just you have to stay in touch with underneath those desires. There's something a lot more magical and mysterious and moody and quiet that you have to stay in touch with so that you can stand on stage and give people a little taste of it, but you're never like, um, never blaming your own creativity for failures or successes. You're just
Mm.
playing the game and rolling the dice and singing your song because you know that people love it and it helps them and they
Yeah.
clap for you and scream for you. And that's all fine and good, but it's like you're sort of in service to the muse or in service to your own creativity as an other, like with reverence and humility instead of, oh, like this is all me. Yeah. I mean, some moments I feel like I've never written a song and I'll never write one again. It's just like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
they
Oh,
just come, it's a gift. It's a gift. So you have to stay postured that way. For me, that's the only thing that's made it
sure.
survivable.
Sure.
If you get too full of yourself, well, there's a fall that comes with that.
Yeah.
Then,
I found that doing house concerts made me more grateful. I had more
yes.
gratitude because you get there in the morning or in the afternoon, you see people setting up and going to the trouble and, working,
Mhm.
converting their home and making the food and bringing in the drinks. And then, you get to know them and then you meet their friends and then you sleep there afterwards and you have breakfast with them. And so you're much more, you see the trouble people have gone to. Whereas in a venue, it's a lot more, yeah, I'm doing my job here. You've paid me to come here. Where's the
Mhm.
my rider's completely. I wanted all the red M&Ms out, and
Yeah, exactly.
so
Yeah, same. And that was a big part of it too. It's just if and when I do start to travel to play again, yeah, house shows was always so sweet and such a cool way to connect with people. Even just, I don't know, doing the sound healing stuff too. I've become pretty passionate about amplification and the extreme excess that we go to of really, you go see a band you like and you dance and you sing along and then you get home that night and your ears are ringing and they're ringing the next day. Like something that has a lot of emotional and spiritual utility and it's so good to go and gather around music. But if it's blasted at you at 110 decibels for 2 hours, you've just done lasting permanent damage to your ears and your nervous system that it's not that you'll never calm down from it, but vibration is very powerful. Music is the most powerful force. And so, just, I just want more people to get the opportunity to be in a room with an unplugged guitar and an unmicrophoned voice and hear a song right here. There's less and less and less opportunities for that.
yeah. But
Yeah.
you've always had this red line in your work, even when you were in the early days, writing, love songs,
Mhm.
uh, and then later on more political stuff. You were always wanting to bring people together. Now it's all about communication.
Yeah.
If you could solve all the problems in the world, if you just got the racists in the room together, or the
Mm.
people who have these perceived differences and realize that they have more, in actual fact, they have more commonality than they would ever believe.
Yeah, it's a nice dream, right? As I've
Yeah.
gotten older too, I'm like, oh man, maybe it's all a little more complicated than
You've
that.
gone
But
through an
maybe,
art.
yeah, maybe it's not too, And so that's, I think I read something that was really helpful about, especially the socio-political stuff of like, it's like the gift of the young songwriter to critique everything and not see themselves as a part of the problem.
Mhm.
You're just like scathingly honest. And sometimes that's super valuable to be like, oh, well, this is the problem and this is the problem and this is the problem. And then, as I've gotten older, it's like, maybe just seeing less problems. Doesn't mean I don't want the world to be a better place too, but it's just like almost narrowing the scope of just like,
Yeah.
well, I don't need to write a song or to think all day about why Donald Trump is the president. Like it just is. But I can think about, my community and what I can do there and what's going on here. And so in a way, the songs I think that I'm working on and heading towards are more personal. It's more like, let me be me and not try to be something likable. It's like, what's the truest thing here? But that's also, there's just a million psychological pitfalls that a person can fall into. I think especially doing an artist endeavor like under your own name. So you're basically saying like, this is me. I am this songwriter guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe part of that arc was finding separation from that and then coming back to just like, yeah, it's just me, man. Like I'm not a business. I'm not a brand. Like I'm just a dude who writes songs and has, take a picture of me and throw it on the internet. Like that's it. It's that simple and it's infinitely complex. And just try not to overthink it. I try to have the courage to post a few things every once in a while, knowing that people resonate, It's, the internet's a gift.
Reminds me of like, because they say if you can get on stage and be yourself, you'll be a star because, everyone's trying to, put up screens and if you can get to the core of your essence. But it reminds me of like stand-up comedians, they do that as well. And they try and, be as,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
but then they become,
vulnerability.
but then they become like, you put up a picture of Seinfeld or, Larry David, then you have to be an exaggerated version of you. And then, the real you is, so even that is, it's going down the rabbit hole.
It's endless. Yeah. I like, you mentioned Jerry Seinfeld. I listened to something from him about that, some interview. And it was, I don't remember a ton of it, but it was this very simple practice that I picked up from him of like right before you're about to sort of get on stage or do whatever that thing is that you step into the exaggerated version of the self. He says, I always go into the bathroom and just wash my face 3 times. And that's like putting on it's like a mask of your own face, kind of, like,
Wow.
you're still being you. You're trying to make that mask you're wearing for the theater as hyper realistic and vulnerable as you can. And you take it off and it doesn't look any different, but only for you, it functions as this protection of like, I'm still a person outside of this that has nothing to do with this. This is actually just a tiny percentage of my life and my value. And I want it to be healthy and good, but like if I flop or if something doesn't work or whatever, it's all good. I got other stuff that I care about. I got my cats and my friends and my whatever, it's just a process. Of course, it's often more than that too, but it's cool stuff. I'm glad to talk to you about it. I'm really, yeah.
You really, how old are you now?
I'm 29.
I mean, I feel like I'm speaking to an old man, it's like.
I feel like one days. Yeah. What is it? I think that might be Seinfeld. No, it's somebody else. It's not the years, it's the miles, I put a lot on and read a lot of books in my 20s, just kind of flopped my way through a lot of really just unlivable mental habits. Have you ever done The Artist's Way? Julia Cameron's little
No, I've heard of it.
That was, I've read a bunch of books like that, but just of going in and like kind of setting that inner artist free from all the expectations or judgments. It's still hard. I feel a little stuck lately, but like, how can we be slow and gentle with that stuckness? That's kind of been the theme. Yeah, part of what I want to set up too is like a sort of therapeutic recording offering where people come in because they're recording too, of all things. Like, oh my gosh, if you want to meet all your demons, just press the red button. It brings all of your
anxiety
beliefs right to the surface. So what a great time to work with it. Like what a great time to really consider like, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter how many hundreds of thousands of streams I get. I still believe that I suck. Like, oh man, I, I got to get rid of that. I got to let that go because everybody should make art. AI is going to replace all our jobs, and all that's going to be left to do is make art. So we all got to start working on it.
Did some of Johann Hari's books help you then during this journey?
Lost Connections. I just saw that he put out a new one. I've been sleeping on it, so I need to. Yeah, Lost Connections was a really profound book for me when I was kind of deep in depression and isolation, and just the way he challenges our understanding of what depression even is and goes in and does the research. I just felt really useful and brave because it's especially as I remember that he was pretty very well researched, but then and it was his own story about working with SSRI. So he's saying like this, this doesn't upset anybody more than me, but just going in and really uncovering. He did such a deep dive in the history of them and their effectiveness. And I tell my friends that take them or have opinions about them. And what I'm saying is it's hard if you just tell somebody like, oh, you should really do some research. People feel, oh, well, this Prozac like saved my life. Like I wasn't functioning at all before that. And it can still be true, but I thought it was really brave how he.
What's an SSR then?
An SSRI, like a serotonin, like depression medication,
Oh, okay.
Prozac, all those ones that he would have a lot better explanation of them than I do.
Yeah.
But just, it really got into almost like the sort of psycho-spiritual understanding of like what is depression, because then his solutions are stuff like meaningful work and community and these examples of depressed people just like working in a community garden once a week. It's like having some sense of what I'm here to do.
Did he like help you get to the South Poles then? Was he an influence in that, you think? Or?
Probably indirectly, yeah. So that, it was definitely just in all of this time where I was using this pursuit of music to keep fuel on the fire almost. And it goes back into the healthy artist thing. Like I think subconsciously, I really believed that all of the best art and the best things that I had to offer came out of my depression and self-sabotage and
right,
anger.
yeah.
And so if I lost any of those things, then I might not be a good artist anymore. And so it keeps you isolating, it keeps you touring, it keeps you from.
Yeah, the music press is a lot to answer for with that. They idolize artists who've died at 27. And
yep. Oh yeah. And I carried a white lighter around in my pocket my entire year when I was 27 because I thought like, oh, I'm this tortured genius. I'm going to die when I'm 27 and people will find my songs, whatever. And it's such a tough cycle to get out of. But I have in my own life too, I've had just such frustrating, but such a lucky experience of like all the projects that I spent 2 years manically working on seem to do nothing and don't resonate with anybody, even though in my opinion, they're the best ones. And then some song that you record in half an hour is the one that, millions of people find their way to. So yeah, I think that like what his book offered is almost like maybe a harsh simplicity, like of like, you're not there's an imbalance in the brain. Sure. That's like a part of life, but it's the effect, not the cause, and the cause is the way that you're living your life and the people you're engaging with and just what you're up to, and it's hard. It's very hard to change what you're up to. It takes years, but you steer the ship just a little bit and look at trajectory of, okay, well, 5 years later, because I just made this simple choice, I stopped drinking or whatever it is. Like, oh my gosh, look at all these different nights where I might have been here instead of at the studio, or I might have, and yeah, it was a really, really wonderful read at a time where I was looking for a way out of my own depression. I felt really hopeless in it. Um, and it was practical and pragmatic and well researched, which is cool because I think us artists, poet types too. Like I'll read a book with a bunch of research, but I usually don't remember any of the
Hey,
members. I just, hello,
hi, how you guys doing?
hey, good,
I'm so
We're just
happy we're
talking about
finally
it.
doing this.
yes,
Hooray! How's your day going so far?
great, man. Great.
Oh, I've had so much caffeine that it is possible that I will die in this interview, and this will be the last thing I ever say. I'm going to get a little bit more. Hang on one second. Just left it over here. But I'm so excited. I feel like we've been planning this like since 1931 or something. So it's very
Pretty
exciting.
much.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. So we really appreciate you taking the time to chat to us.
Oh my God, I really appreciate doing this. Hooray.
So we've got to come up with a song here, and we've been doing the interview so long, but we better do the song. We better finish the song before you finish another book. Otherwise, we'll be out of date, So it'll just be, I don't know what song's going to be about. I mean, it could just be about a little aside. It doesn't have to be a summary of any of your books, but so we just have because your book's been so helpful to Corey here. So he just wants to, tell you about it and share experiences.
Oh, I don't actually know even which book you want to talk about. Which one do you want to do?
Yeah, that's a good quote. I actually I'm a little behind. I didn't realize that there's new ones. So I gotta get down to the bookstore soon. But the one that really resonated with me and hit at a great time was Lost Connections. So that's the one I'm most familiar with. I know you're probably past the promotion cycle on that book by now, but yeah, we were just talking about it. I was just kind of sharing how it came to me at a time where just so much about the way everybody talks about depression wasn't making sense, it wasn't resonating. And the therapist I had, and just, it was like, man, there's just missing pieces to the understanding of this.
In what way? What
Yeah.
was it about what the therapist said? By the way, are we recording? Do you want to, have we started? I recently did a podcast where I chatted to the people for like half an hour and didn't realize that actually was the podcast. And I said things that were too unguarded. So, but I'm very happy to.
We're rolling now. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So, Corey, tell me a bit about what was it the therapist was saying that wasn't landing with you?
Well, I think it really starts with just like the way a diagnosis, and I can't remember now if this was a facet of your book or just but like a diagnosis at first really feels like your best friend. And it's like, oh, thank God, like there's nothing wrong with me, or this is what's wrong with me. And I can take this pill and this will get better. And then that for me, and I think for most people I know, that just dries up pretty quickly. That's not really getting at the root of the issue here. It's simpler, but also infinitely more complex. And it has to do with the way you're living your life and the community you're plugged into and just all of those things. So particularly when I first brought up was, I remembered that you had done just a really, really deep dive into the history of the SSRIs and what they do and how they affect people. And I just remember literally feeling angry as I read your research about how kind of manipulated the realities are with those medicines and what they do to people. That kind of keeps you on the hook, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just think about what you're saying about diagnosis, because I guess the way I started to think about it is like everyone needs a story for their pain and their distress, right?
Yeah.
I did. And what a diagnosis is a thin and simplistic story. And if you have no story at all, a thin and simplistic story will be like a life raft, right? And it will give you a lot of relief. But you can't live in a life raft, right? You need a more complex, rich, and truthful story. And it's not that the diagnosis story doesn't have any truth in it; it does. But I mean, the way I often begin by talking about my book Lost Connections about this is that I wrote it because there were these two mysteries that were really hanging over me, and that I was quite ashamed to look into. So the first mystery is, I think when I finished the book, I was 38, 39. And every single year that I've been alive, depression and anxiety had increased in the United States, in Britain, and across the world, right? Every year. And that was before COVID, when it massively increased, right? It blew up even more. It was rising, 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 and then it absolutely hugely increases further. And I think I just wanted to know, well, why? I mean, like, why is it that every year that I've been alive, people are getting more depressed? And I wanted to understand that because of a more personal mystery that I think really connects with what you're saying, Corey, which is that I remember when I was a teenager going to my doctor and just crying and saying I had this feeling like pain was leaking out of me and I didn't understand it and I couldn't control it. And my doctor told me this story that I now realize was very well intentioned. My doctor was an extremely nice person, but hugely oversimplified. My doctor said, well, we know why people feel like this. Some people are just lacking a chemical in their brains called serotonin. You're one of them. All you need to do is take these drugs that boost your serotonin levels. You'll be fine. So I started taking an antidepressant called Paxil in the US or Seroxat in Europe. And I felt much better at first. And this feeling of pain came back. So I went back. She gave me a higher dose. Again, I felt better. Again, the feeling of pain came back. And I was in this cycle until for 13 years, I took the maximum possible dose that you're allowed to take. And I still felt like shit. So I was like, well, what's happening here, right? And so I wanted to really understand it. So I ended up going on this big journey all over the world, and I interviewed, loads of the leading experts on, crucially, on what causes depression and what solves it. It's not a book about chemical antidepressants. They give some relief.
Right.
It's a book about what causes depression and what solves it, in which drugs have some place in the menu. But I think there was a moment that really, there were so many moments in the research for the book that blew my mind, but I think one of the ones that really, probably of all the moments in the book, the moment when something most became clear to me was when I went to interview a South African psychiatrist called Dr. Derek Summerfield. And he told me this story. He happened to be in Cambodia in Southeast Asia in 2001 when they first introduced chemical antidepressants for people in that country. They'd never had them in Cambodia before. And the doctors, the local Cambodian doctors, said to him, well, what are antidepressants? Because they'd never heard of them. And he told them. And they said, oh, we don't need them. We've already got antidepressants. And he was like, what do you mean? He thought they were going to talk about some kind of like herbal remedy, like St. John's wort, biloba or something. Instead, they told him a story. There was a farmer in their community who worked in the rice fields. And one day he stood on a landmine and he got his leg blown off. So they gave him an artificial limb and he went back to work in the rice fields. But apparently it's very traumatic to, apparently it's very painful to work underwater when you've got an artificial limb. And I'm guessing it's pretty traumatic to go and work in the field where your leg got blown off. The guy started to cry a lot. After a while, he just wouldn't get out of bed. He was crying so much. He developed what we would call classic depression. And that's when the Cambodian doctor said to Dr. Summerfield, well, this is when we gave him an antidepressant. And Dr. Summerfield said, what was it? And they said, well, we went and sat with him and we listened to him. And we realized that his pain made sense. You only had to sit with this guy for 5 minutes to see why he was so distressed. One of the doctors figured if we bought this guy a cow, he could become a dairy farmer. He wouldn't be in this position that was screwing him up so much. So they bought him a cow. Within a couple of weeks, his crying was gone. Within a couple of months, his depression was completely lifted. He never went back to being depressed again, right? And Cambodian said to Dr. Summerfield, so you see, doctor, that cow, that was an antidepressant. That's what you mean, right? If you've been raised to think about depression with the narrative that you were given, that I was given, that sounds completely crazy, right? I went to my doctor for an antidepressant. She gave me a cow. But what those Cambodian doctors knew intuitively is what the leading medical body in the whole world, the World Health Organization, and it's really shocked me in the research, what they've been telling us for years now. If you're depressed, if you're anxious, you're not weak, you're not crazy, you're not in the main a machine with broken parts. You're a human being with unmet needs. And what you need is practical help to get those deeper needs met. So the question we all need to be asking is, what's the cow for you? Anything that reduces depression should be called an antidepressant. For some people, that will include drugs. For me, it was for a short time. And then sadly, they stopped working. But that needs to be precisely because the causes of depression go so much deeper than just a missing chemical. The
Right.
solutions to depression need to go so much bigger and wider as well. So I saw that in practice a lot over the world, but I'm conscious this is a long answer. I'm going to shut up now.
No, thank you. That's awesome. I forgot that story was in the book, or that's just okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that one. That's really cool. What it's just got my own brain spinning now. In such a beautiful way, because it's I guess maybe I'll phrase it this way. And so that book came out in 2017. Is that right? 2018.
Must have been 2018. It must have been.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I heard you say that the figures on anxiety and depression have skyrocketed since COVID. What are like the practical ways that you see people figuring out? Because like you said, like that diagnosis sometimes is a thin story, but then at least you have some place to start. That it seems increasingly overwhelming to even begin to understand, well, what would be my cow in this world, in this country where everything's kind of falling apart. Do you have any, I guess, in the years since the book's come out and further research and I have to imagine that your new book ties into this as well with the attention span, because I know that's such a big part of it. But what are the practical ways that people can go about, finding what will work for them when it seems that doctors aren't able or willing to tell us, right?
Well, doctors are. It's important to say doctors do want to tell us this. Most doctors know. It's in every medical textbook that depression has causes that go beyond mere biology, right? It's just that in the systems that we've built, which is not the fault of humans, that it's much harder to address this problem. So what we want to do, and I saw this in practice all over the world in the research for Lost Connections, from Sao Paulo to Sydney to San Francisco, is the most effective strategies for dealing with depression are the ones that deal with the actual underlying reasons why people are depressed in the first place. So what I want to do is help people to tell richer, truthful, and more complex stories about their depression, about its causes. And once you understand what causes something, obviously you can find better solutions, in the same way that, if you don't have an accurate map of where you are, it's much harder to find your way to your destination. And I think we've been given inaccurate maps of our pain. And we need to we need to draw more accurate maps of our pain and find our way. That all sounds very fancy and slightly bullshit. So let me give you a very concrete example where I think it starts to make sense to people. So I go through in the book the scientific evidence for 9 different causes of depression and anxiety.
Right.
And let's start with the one that I think will be playing out most for the largest number of people who are watching and listening to this podcast. We are the loneliest society in human history. It's a study that asks Americans, how many close friends do you have who you could turn to in a crisis? And when they started doing it years ago, the most common answer was 5. Today, this actually even before COVID, the most common answer had become none, right? It wasn't the average, it was the most common answer. There were more people who had nobody to turn to than any other option. 41% of Americans agreed with this statement: no one knows me well, right? And then we had COVID, where we had to all separate in order to prevent the spread of infection, right? And you think about, what is life like when you have nothing to share your pain and your pleasure, no one to share your pain and your pleasure with, right? And I spent a lot of time in discussing this with a totally amazing scientist called Professor John Cassiopo, who was at Chicago University, sadly died not that long ago. And he studied loneliness for decades, and he proved that loneliness causes depression. I know that sounds like a bit of a no shit Sherlock insight, but he proved right? It's a bit like, do we really need evidence for that? But yeah, he proved it very clearly. And he discovered loads of really important things about loneliness that we can talk about and explore. But I'll never forget him saying to me one day, why do we exist? Why are we here? You, me, everyone else you've ever met. Why are we here? One key reason is that our ancestors on the savannas of Africa were really good at one thing. They weren't bigger than the animals they took down. They weren't faster than the animals they took down, but they were much better at banding together into groups and cooperating. Just like bees evolved to live in a hive, humans evolved to live in a tribe, right? If you ever see a bee that's cut off from its hive, it goes crazy because it doesn't make sense, right? We are the first humans ever to disband our tribes. And it's making us feel terrible. If you think about the circumstances where we evolved, if you were cut off from the tribe, you were depressed and anxious for a really good reason. You were in terrible danger, right?
Yeah.
Loneliness evolved as a signal saying, get the fuck back to the tribe, right? It's our deepest instinct, and it's the source of our strength and our superpower, right? It's the reason we survived as a species, because we could band together. We weren't bigger than the animals that we took down a lot of the time. We weren't faster than the animals we took down a lot of the time, but we were much better at banding together into groups and cooperating, right? That is our superpower as a species. And loneliness is what drives us back to using our superpower. It's not a malfunction to feel bad when you are lonely, right? It's a necessary signal. And this is a really important reorientation we need to do in the whole depression debate. Our depression and our anxiety, they're extraordinarily painful, but they are not malfunctions. They are signals, right? Telling you something really important about what's missing in your life and how to get it back. And we need to stop insulting the signals by saying they're just a malfunction, like a glitch in a computer program, and start listening to and honoring those signals. So again, that sounds a bit fancy. So let's talk about a very concrete place that built on that insight, right? So loneliness causes depression. We've become much more lonely. One of the heroes of my book is a man named Dr. Sam Everington, who's a doctor in East London, where I lived for many years, a poor part of East London, though sadly Sam was never my doctor. And Sam was really uncomfortable because he had loads of patients coming to him with terrible depression and anxiety. And like me, he's not opposed to chemical antidepressants. They give some relief to some people. But he could see two things. Firstly, that chemical antidepressants took the edge off for some people while harming some others, but they generally didn't solve the problem, right? They just kind of took the edge off. And secondly, his patients were depressed and anxious for really good, obvious, understandable reasons, like they were really lonely. So one day he began to pioneer a different approach, one that's now spreading all over Europe. He had one day a woman came to him in his office called Lisa Cunningham. I got to know her later. And Lisa had been shut away in her home with crippling depression and anxiety for 7 years.
Wow.
And Sam said to Lisa, don't worry, I'll carry on giving you these drugs, but I'm also going to prescribe something else. I want you to come here to the doctor's offices twice a week to meet with a group of other depressed and anxious people, not to talk about how shitty you feel. I mean, you can do that if you want, but that's not the point of it. I want you to get together and find something meaningful that you could do together. And the first time the group met, Lisa literally started vomiting with anxiety. It was so overwhelming to her to be around people again. But the group started talking and they were like, okay, what can we do together? And there was an area behind the doctor's offices that was known as Dog Shit Alley. It was an alley where dogs would go and shit, but it was like just like wasteland, like scrubland. But they started talking, and these are inner city East London people like me. They didn't know anything about gardening, but they were like, well, we could turn Dog Shit Alley into a garden, right? So they started to watch clips on YouTube about gardening, and they started to get their fingers in the soil. They started to learn the rhythms of the seasons. There's a lot of evidence that exposure to the natural world is a really powerful antidepressant. But they started to do something even more important. They started to form a group. They started to form a tribe. They started to care about each other. If someone didn't show up, the others would go looking for them, be like, hey, what's wrong, Bob? They began to solve each other's problems. The way Lisa put it to me is, as the garden began to bloom, we began to bloom. This approach is called social prescribing. It's where doctors prescribe people to take part in groups. It doesn't have to be gardening. There's loads of things it can be. There's growing research on this, small but growing research on this. For example, a small study in Norway found it was twice as effective as chemical antidepressants in reducing anxiety. I think for a kind of obvious reason, right? It was the reasons why people were depressed and anxious. Now, of course, there's other reasons why people get depressed and anxious, and we need to deal with them. And I can talk about places that have done that. But you begin to see, when you understand what's causing the problem in a more truthful and complex way that honors the range of causes of depression, and indeed there are some biological contributions, But when you begin to look at the range of the causes, you can then begin to deal with them in a more effective and practical way.
Yeah, that part about the garden I remember as one of the critical takeaways for me from that book was just again, so it's so simple but so beautiful to just get your hands dirty and take a little bit of responsibility for your corner of the world and plant some vegetables and get to know your neighbors.
I think there's a thing as well where I sometimes feel like with all my books, what I'm doing, none of my books contain any like mind-blowing revelations. It's not like Einstein discovering the nature of, reality or something. All I'm doing is giving people permission to know something they already know at some level. I doubt if we stopped the next people to walk past your apartment in Jacksonville and we told them that story of the garden, no one's going to be like, what? Like that's, it's obviously intuitively true, but you think, I never forget, I did an interview for the book with NPR. The night before the book came out, I remember sitting with my best friend and saying, I'm really worried that people are going to read Lost Connections and say, well, this is totally banal, obvious. Why do we need a book telling us all this stuff, right?
Mm.
And then the book came out and it kept being described as incredibly controversial. And I'll never forget going on an interview for NPR. I don't remember how long after the book came out it was. And the interviewer said to me, I said what I've just said to you about loneliness. The interviewer said to me, well, this is an incredibly controversial point. And I don't remember if I actually said it or I just thought it. What I wanted to say was, it's a sign that this culture has gone mad that you can say that to me, right? So it's this very strange thing where we, at some level, we know, and there's lots of things in the book people wouldn't automatically know, but there are lots of things, the emotional core of what I'm saying would be apparent to everyone. And yet, we have been, another story, which contains some truth in it. There are real biological contributions to depression. We can talk about that if you like. But that story, which is one small part of a bigger picture, has completely crowded out our much more common sense insights, things that your grandmother and my grandmother would have known automatically, that it would have seemed ridiculous to don't think any other way, right? So, it's a curious thing that.
It's interesting in the age of information that intuitive information seems more distant. Do you have, because then you're almost getting into like really zoomed out metaphysics and what's going on in the world. Like what is it that we're, how is it and what and why is it that we're losing? Is it a result of the lack of the tribe, like because we don't have each other to kind of know these things, intuitive things from, or what would you say is?
That's so interesting. I mean, I guess there's an underlying way of thinking about it, which is that everyone knows they have natural physical needs, obviously, food and water and shelter and clean air. If I took those things away from you, you'd obviously be in trouble really quickly. But there's equally strong evidence that all human beings have natural psychological needs.
Right.
You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel that people see you and value you. You need to feel you have a future that makes sense, right? These are, of course, the reasons why depression and anxiety have risen during COVID, because we were deprived of those things. And a lot of, it's not everything that's going on, but a lot of what's going on is we've created a culture that's depriving us of our psychological needs. And obviously the question of why that happened, there's no one big answer for why that happened.
Sure.
But I think there's a few that we know about that are really worth thinking about. So one is, everyone knows junk food has taken over our diets and made us physically sick. Right? You can probably see from my chins that KFC, I'm no stranger to KFC, right? But interestingly, a kind of junk values have taken over our minds and made us mentally sick. It's quite like junk food. So for thousands of years, philosophers have said, if you think life is about money and status and showing off, you're going to feel like shit, right? It's not an exact quote from Confucius, but that's basically what he said, right? But weirdly, nobody had scientifically investigated this until an incredible man I got to know, who you should totally have on your podcast. If you want an intro, let me know, named Professor Tim Kasser. And Professor Kasser spent more than 30 years at Knox College in Illinois studying how your values, what you think is important, affect all sorts of elements of your life, but particularly your mental health, your levels of depression and anxiety. And what he discovered so much, but to boil it down incredibly simplistically, one of the things he discovered is that the philosophers were right. The more you think life is about money and status and showing off, the kind of values that are inculcated in us by advertising and Instagram and everything like them, the more likely you are to become depressed and anxious by a really quite significant amount. And there's lots of reasons why. One is that your relationships deteriorate if you value people for how they look, not for what they are. Look, some again comes back to kind of blindingly obvious stuff. No one watching thinks they're going to lie on their deathbed and think about all the likes they got on Instagram and all the shoes they bought, right?
Yeah.
And think about moments of love and meaning and connection. But as Professor Kasser put it to me, we live in a machine that is designed to get us to neglect what is important about life. More 18-month-old children recognize the McDonald's M than know their own last name. We live in a culture where we are bombarded with messages to consume. The solution, if you don't feel good, is to buy shit you don't need and display it on social media to make people you barely know jealous. It's so we live in this machinery. So again, I learned about techniques we can use to protect ourselves against that. And we've got to dismantle that machinery eventually. But yes, it's funny. You're not so far from Miami where you are, and I never forget. I can't remember if it was when I was working on the book or just after I was in Miami it was before, because I was researching Chasing the Scream, a book about addiction and the war on drugs. And I went to interview someone who'd been the leader of the Cali cartel in Colombia, who now lives in near South Beach. And I took an afternoon off. I'm not very good at relaxing. And I was sitting in the ocean in South Beach. And I was like, oh, look how beautiful the world is. Isn't life amazing? And then literally fucking massive boats go past with billboards on them, right? I'm like, you can't even sit in the ocean and not be told to buy shit all the time, right? You cannot, there's like nowhere you can go where you're not bombarded, and planes fly over South Beach. So, and you're just like, wow, you can't have one fucking second in this culture without being told to consume. So yeah, it's a profound pollution of us. Spiritually, we all need a value system to guide us through life.
Yeah.
Just like we all need nutrition, you know, in our food. But just like junk food appeals to the part of us that needs nutrition but actually poisons us, these junk values appeal to the part of us that need a system to guide us through life, but actually pull us towards happiness. It's like a kind of KFC for the soul, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Man, so many good parts of that.
I'm fascinated by musical creation, right? So as I'm saying, you guys, how does it work? Like creatively in your head? Is it something you can verbally articulate, or?
You want to chime in on that? Or I take it.
Oh, we were actually talking about it just before you came in, and how you have to kind of wait for the song, for the good ones. You got to wait for the song to come afterwards, because it's kind of higher self process. So usually, I get the ideas when you're in the shower, when your brain's turned off, or when you're not. If you sit down with the blank page and try and force it, it's quite difficult, I've found.
That's so fascinating. I always think of like musical creation feels like I'm like the least musical person in the whole world. So this is a very uninformed thing, but it feels to me like, as very much an outsider, like musical creation always seems like the purest form of creative experience, because you experience it so purely in music. It feels like you're accessing something that's a particular kind of, I don't know, how would you describe it?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I'm, and it ties into what you were just saying too about the advertising. So I'm sitting in my office where I work with Tibetan singing bowls and do kind of sound therapy for people, which is a really, really helpful way to reset the nervous system. The bowls themselves, but even just being in a room that's black and quiet and there's nothing for sale and anything, it's just so rare. But
Mm.
saying that of like when you said musical creation is what did you just said it, but it's like this extremely kind of pure expression. When you get into the reality that everything is vibration, right? That even the table this iPad is sitting on has particles that are vibrating, and that everything we interact with has a vibration. The KFC chicken and the healthy stuff and the garden, it all carries with it some kind of vibration that goes into our body and our resonating field and all of that. That sort of creating with music to me feels like an extension of one's ability to be creative with our own life, right? And my own depression was so often this sort of feeling of despair or hopelessness, like I just don't have a choice here, like this is all, I'm on a sinking ship, and why would I be happy? Why would I plant a garden? Why would I do any of these things? In that, it's for me, what my experience has been as well is the necessity of, I like what you said earlier about anxiety and depression being signals that comes in a lot with the people I work with that come with anxiety and depression, of just giving yourself space to listen to those signals and not just crowding your life with more consumerism and more noise and more travel and even the good things, right? Like sometimes it's like, oh, I really need to work on this song and this project and I need to do some writing today and whatever. And just months can go by where you've never given yourself a moment to just sit and be like, oh, okay, there's a signal that loops in my mind every day that tells me something absurd, but if I actually listen long enough, it quiets down and it becomes something a lot more digestible and practical. And yeah, music just has, I think that's why we love music so much as a creature, that it has sort of, even in its movement, like a stillness to it, that some feeling or some emotion or something that happened has been preserved in this way, in this arrangement of chords and words, so that even if I'm driving down the road moving, like I feel some sense of stability in this breakup song because it resonates with something in me that needs to hear that everything is doomed because she left, because that's how I feel. But it's my answer's getting a little spirally, but yeah, music is just, we were talking too before you jumped on about people's exposure to music. And I would say all that you're talking about with advertising and consumerism, that most artists really think of what they do as a product. And then they have to look into the budget and the label and all these different ways to get one of the most natural and easily accessible medicines that exists for the spiritual problems that aren't easily measured in a lab. And even if you do go hear some music, it's usually blasted at you through a speaker at a volume that's bad for your ears and bad for your nervous system. So, yeah,
That's
I think
interesting. That's so interesting about what you were saying about giving people space, because it's really one of the most amazing people I met for Lost Connections was this woman called Joanne Cassiatore.
Mhm.
And I think she her story really illustrates that refusal to give people space, because it's an example that everyone can get when they hear it. So Joanne had a baby daughter called Cheyenne who died shortly after being born, and very shortly after her daughter died, the doctors tried to give Joanne antidepressants, chemical antidepressants, and she was like, I'm not depressed. My baby died. Like
Mhm.
I need to feel sad. My baby died. And she discovered that, in fact, enormous numbers of grieving parents are being drugged very rapidly after their children die. Again, you can see it's well intentioned, right? It's not bad people doing it, but
Yeah.
But she began to wonder if this interfered with the grieving process. She's a she began to study this in great detail, and she learned about this really fascinating and revealing kind of history, which I think really connects what you were just saying right back to what you were saying at the start, Corey, about diagnosis. So until the 1950s, there was no standardized way of diagnosing depression across the United States. Doctors would just use whatever they thought depression was. So there was something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is like the kind of Bible of how you diagnose things, which had its first edition. And in it, I can't remember if that was the first edition then or there'd already been one, but either way, they added depression, right? And they were like, how do you diagnose depression? So they came up with a pretty straightforward checklist, kind of obvious things. If we drew up one now, it wouldn't be so different. You know, if someone is doing, I think it was if you do more than 5 of the following 10 things for, you know, a certain amount of time every day, you're depressed, right? So it's crying a lot, feeling hopeless, kind of, we could guess them, right? So they start using it. They give this to psychiatrists all over the United States and just general family doctors, and they start using it. But quite quickly afterwards, people started to come back to them. This guy called Gary Greenberg has written a lot about this very well as well. They come back to them and say, these doctors come back to the people who wrote the DSM and say, well, look, we've got a problem here. If we use these guidelines the way you've told us to, we're going to have to diagnose every grieving person as depressed because this is how you feel when you're grieving. And the people who wrote the DSM were like, oh shit, that's not what we meant. So they said, okay. Well, they added something that became known as the grief loophole, where they said, if you have more than 5 of these 10 symptoms for more than however long it was, a few weeks, diagnose the person as depressed, unless someone they love has died in the last 6 months, in which case they're not depressed. It's a normal reaction. Don't diagnose them, right? But that began to beg all sort of questions like, why is if someone you love dying the only situation in life where you're allowed to just feel like shit for a while, right? Why not if you lose your job? Why not if you get stuck in a job you hate? Why not if you're homeless, right? The way Joanne put it is, it let context into diagnosis. And diagnosis is the opposite of context. Diagnosis is a narrow story. You've got the following 5 things, then this is the problem. And whereas context just blows all that up, right? Suddenly you have to pay much attention to the individual. Why, like the Cambodian doctors with the guy with the cow, you've got to say, well, why does this person feel bad? Oh, okay, they feel bad for these reasons. Well, that kind of makes sense. This person feels bad. What can we do to help an individual with their specific problem? But that's not what our systems are built to do. And actually, then an even worse thing happened with the grief loophole, which is where it comes to being about space to feel bad. Employers started to complain. So they began to cut back the grief loophole because people were entitled then to kind of grief, being treated well for grief. So they cut back. Initially, you were allowed 6 months to feel bad before you were diagnosed as crazy. And they cut it back with each new version of the DSM. They cut it back until finally you were only allowed 2 weeks to grieve. And then if you were still upset after that because your baby died, then, diagnose them. And then in the most recent one, they just got rid of the grief exception altogether. And they've gone back to, you can be diagnosed that day, right? So it really helps you to see that thing. We refuse to give people space. To feel bad. And that's because of this kind of capitalist machinery, right? Get to work. Come on. Come on.
Right.
Don't you be your little broken machine crying for your baby. Get back to work. Yeah. It's a machine that can't afford to give you space to feel bad, right? Your job is to be the productive little worker drone, not the complex human being with feelings and sadness and grief and joy and rage and all these other things. That's not what you're there to do.
Well, that's fascinating because I love thinking about it with the grief loophole, tongue twister. That I've done a little studying as well. I took a death doula certification, and it was a lot of studying about our attitudes towards death and grief in this country, but in kind of this modern world, the what you were just saying, the capitalist, be functioning, be all that. And it's just making me think as well that it's almost like all of our depression in general, there's always grief is such a big part of life. Your grief for your own impermanence, your grief for the fact that everything's passing away. You know, that's kind of the crux of most spirituality. It's such a foundation in Christianity. It's such a foundation, and Buddhism is like accepting the suffering that is innate with just being here. And so when you say, oh, well, you know, if you're grieving your baby for 2 weeks, like, you know, yeah, I like you put it so bluntly, that's crazy. And the mind's a crazy place, you know, the mind fixates and does its thing endlessly. And we don't create space for it to do that. It gets really volatile. Go ahead.
And there's I think there's several things in what you're saying. So there's innate sadnesses in the human condition, right?
Mhm.
You, me, and everyone we all love are going to die, and we will all be forgotten. Okay, so there's a sadness in the human condition, right?
Not our Instagrams though, right?
One day Instagram will
Something lives on forever.
Someone in the ruins of our civilization will find you know, our Instagram feeds and be inspired. But the but also on top of that, there are preventable forms of sadness, right?
Yeah.
So think about, for example, I'll give you another example of one of the kind of antidepressants in inverted commas that I think we should be thinking about. So again, this is a complete no shit Sherlock insight, but wait for the bombshell. Turns out there's strong evidence that financial insecurity makes you depressed, right? If you're poor, right? Again, I doubt there's anyone who's listening who's going, what the fuck? There's very strong science. In fact, people who have a private income from property are 10 times less likely to develop severe anxiety than people who don't, right?
Wow.
So again, it doesn't mean rich people can't get anxious. Of course they can. There are other factors going on, but you can see financial insecurity is a huge factor. And there was a really interesting experiment in saying, well, what happens if you reduce people's financial anxiety? So in the early 1970s, and there've been subsequent ones since, but in the early 1970s, the Canadian government chose a town. They seemed, as far as I can tell, to have genuinely chosen it at random. They chose a town called Dauphin in Manitoba. It's about 3 or 4 hours out of Winnipeg, for anyone who knows Manitoba. And they randomly chose a load of people in this town. And they said, from now on, we're going to give you the equivalent of about $12,000 in today's money. There's nothing you have to do in return for it. And there's nothing you can do unless you go to prison. That means we will take this away from you. You're a citizen of our country. We want you to have a good life. You're going to have $12,000 a year, right? $12,000 a year, you're not going to have a great life, right? You're not going to be drinking champagne and smoking caviar. Equally, you're not going to be homeless. You're not going to be, you know, fucked if you got $12,000 a year, right?
Yeah.
And then they were followed by social scientists whose data was analyzed by an amazing woman I interviewed called Dr. Evelyn Forget to see what happened. And loads of things happened, but the most interesting for the purposes of our conversation is depression and anxiety massively fell. In fact, psychiatric problems were so bad that people had to be shut away in mental hospitals fell by 9%, right? Incredible.
Wow.
You won't find a drug that causes that decline in 9% over 3 years. And again, it's kind of not hard to see why, right? If you give people a baseline of financial security, you're less anxious, you're less depressed, you have more of a sense of your future. Interestingly as well, no one quit working. People carried on working, they didn't give up their jobs. The only exception was some women, when they had babies, took more time out of work to look after the babies. And there were some people who went back to study. But no one was just like, oh, I've got $12,000. I'm just going to lie around and, you know, watch TV or whatever all day. And again, I think you can see that as I think Dr. Forget put it to me, it's the quotes in the book. That's an antidepressant, right? It's called the guaranteed income. That's an antidepressant. They're now experimenting with doing guaranteed basic incomes all over the world, Finland, Scotland, Canada again, bits of Canada. So there's all sorts of ways that once you start from, okay, depression's a signal. It's telling us something's gone wrong, right? Now, that thing that's gone wrong may be something in your personal life that cannot be dealt with social causes, right? Maybe
Right.
you're deeply in love with someone and she's in love with someone else. Okay, well, there's no social policy that can solve that, right?
Mhm.
A lot of these things, most of them, according to the World Health Organization, the leading medical body in the world, are social factors. Not all of them, but most of them are social factors that can be dealt with socially. It's why financially insecure, highly unequal countries have significantly higher levels of depression and anxiety than more financially secure, less unequal societies. For example, people like Professor Kate Pickett and Professor Richard Wilkinson have shown, both of whom I know and have interviewed, have shown that really well. So, in their brilliant book, The Spirit Level. So, again, when you understand a problem better, you can begin to solve it better. There's nothing that's made worse by better understanding. And the evidence is overwhelming that depression has these 9 causes that I write about in Lost Connections. And my objection is not to chemical antidepressants. They give some relief to some.
Right.
My objection is to the hugely oversimplified story that was created, not by doctors, but literally by drug company PRs,
Right.
to sell these stories. And so there was a huge study published last year in Britain in a major scientific journal that showed there was never any evidence that depression was caused by low serotonin. In fact, there isn't even any evidence that depressed people have lower serotonin than anyone else, right? And I remember when that study came out. So obviously I'd written about this in the book, which came out years before, because I'd spoken to a lot of the scientists. This was known. One of the scientists involved said to me at the time, you can't even say the serotonin story has been discredited because it was never credited. There was never a time when half of the scientists in the field believed it. But I remember the study came out last year, and obviously, lots of people were approaching me saying, oh, wow, they've proved you right. And I'm like, well, no, it's just that I listened to those scientists a few years before this study came out. One of the things I thought was really wild was it, and I really recommend people look up that study and then look at the responses. What really did make me a bit angry, and I'm not generally an angry person. I don't generally get angry about these things. I try to approach them in a spirit of love and compassion for everyone involved. But when loads of the people who promoted the serotonin story for years just said, oh, we never told anyone that. It's just a myth. And it did feel like, it's not a concept I generally use, but it felt like gaslighting. It's like to turn around and go. So as the paper showed, I forget the exact statistic, but I think it showed that 90% of people believed that depression was caused by low serotonin. How funny that 90% of people came to believe that if no one ever said it, right? Where did we get that into our heads from, right? So that was frustrating. The people who promoted that story are not evil people. I don't believe anyone is evil, but bad people. That what they should do is level. We all get things wrong. They should say, because they have a moral responsibility to undo the harm they've done by telling this oversimplified story, which harmed me. In my own case, I was depressed and anxious because I'd experienced some really quite severe abuse when I was a child. And what I needed was to release the sense of shame that I wrongly felt around having experienced that abuse, which I felt I had caused, which of course was not correct, because no child deserves to be abused or causes their abuse. But of course, that's what abusers tell you, so you internalize it. Because I was told, oh, it's just a problem in your brain. It's a chemical that's lacking in your brain. I had these 13 years where I go off in this other direction, and it took me away from the solution, right? It took me away. Now, I'm not confident. If I hadn't been told that story, I would have found the better solution. Maybe I wouldn't have been ready to process those very disturbing events at that time. I can't be sure. But what I am sure of is that it really didn't help to be told an inaccurate story created by drug company PRs all those years, which I really deeply internalized and believed was true about myself, that I thought I was biologically broken, when in fact there was nothing wrong with me. There was something wrong with what had been done to me. They have a responsibility to try to undo that harm. And it would be really helpful. And I have not heard any scientist who promoted those theories yet do this. And I do find that frustrating, given that they don't defend what they said. I would like them to say the truth, which is we believed this because we were told it by the drug company PRs. We told it to our patients. It was a mistake. And now we're going to tell people a more truthful and complex story about what's happened. And while there are lots of scientists who promote this more complex story, and indeed they were the sources for my book, they're the reason why I know this. These are not my theories, they're the evidence that I learned from the experts that I interviewed all over the world. I haven't heard that contrition from those people, and I would like to hear it. Not because I want to shame them or anything like that. I've got things wrong. You've got things wrong. Being human is, we get things wrong sometimes about very big things.
Yeah.
But it would help as an act of public education. It would be really helpful for people to tell the truth about this now. I've got very intense and sober faces now.
Oh, it's just beautiful. Yeah.
Can I tell you a story that really helped me make sense of all of this? So I think you can tell that, you know, I learned a lot from scientists and experts. But I think the people who taught me most about all of this and the kind of truth of it are a group of people who are not scientists and doctors. So in the summer of 2011, on a big anonymous housing project in Berlin, a Turkish-German woman called Nuria Cengiz, who I got to know, climbed out of her wheelchair and she put a sign in her window. So she lived on the ground floor of, like I say, a big anonymous housing project, like a housing project anywhere in the world. And the sign said something like, I got a notice saying I'm going to be evicted from my apartment next Thursday night. So on Wednesday, I'm going to kill myself. This housing project is called Kotti, and it's in a place that it was for a long time a very poor part of West Berlin, and basically only 3 groups of people wanted to live there. There were recent Muslim immigrants like this woman Nuria, there were gay men, and there were punk squatters. But as you can imagine, they didn't really know each other. No one knew anyone. They didn't get along. It was a very lonely place. But people started to walk past Nuria's window and they saw this sign and they're like, oh, this woman needs help. So people knocked on her door and they said, do you need any help? And Nuria said, fuck you, I don't want any help. I'm going to kill myself. But people outside her apartment who'd never met started talking. And this area was gentrifying very rapidly. So the whole of the rents all over Berlin were going up, but they were particularly going up in Kreuzberg and Kotti. So loads of people, their rent was going up and they were afraid they were going to be evicted like her. So they started talking, and one of them had an idea. There's a big thoroughfare that goes through the center of Kotti into Mitte, the center of Berlin. And one of them said, you know, on Saturday, if we block the road and we build a little barricade in the middle of the road and we have a protest, there'll probably be a bit of fuss. The media will probably come. They'll probably let this woman stay in her apartment. There might even be some pressure to keep our rents down for all of us. Let's try it. So Saturday came and they did it. They blocked the road, and Nuria was like, I'm going to kill myself. I might as well let them push me into the middle of the street. So they pushed her into the middle of the street. The media did show up. There's a bit of a news story in Berlin that day. And it got to the end of the day and the police showed up and they said, okay, you had your fun, take this shit down and go home. But the people who lived in Kotti said, well, hang on a minute. You haven't told Nuria she gets to stay. In fact, we want a rent freeze for our entire housing project. Until we get that, we're not taking this down. But of course they knew the minute they walked away from this little makeshift barricade they built, the police would just tear it down. So one of my favorite people at Kotti, a woman called Tanya Gartner, who Tanya is one of the punk squatters in Kotti. She wears tiny little mini skirts, even in Berlin winter. She's hardcore. Tanya had this idea. In her apartment, she had a klaxon, those things that make really loud noises at soccer matches when you spin them around. She went and got it. She said, okay, everyone, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drop a timetable to man this barricade. We're going to man it 24 hours a day until they give in and give us what we want. If the police come to take it down, let off the klaxon, we'll all come down from our apartments and we'll stop them. So people started manning up to man this barricade 24 hours a day. And people who'd never met each other and definitely would never have met each other. So Tanya, in her tiny little miniskirt, was paired with Nuria, who's a very religious Muslim in a full hijab. And I think Tanya and Nuria had the Thursday night shift together. And the first few nights they sit there, they're like, this is so awkward. We have got nothing to talk about. And they sat there, Tanya was kind of tapping away on her laptop. But as the nights went on, Tanya and Nuria discovered they had something incredibly powerful in common. Nuria had come to Berlin when she was 16. She just had twins with her babies. She worked every job she could to earn enough money to send for her husband, who was back in Turkey, to come and join her. And sitting there in the cold in Kotti with Tanya, she told her one night something she'd never told anyone in Germany before. She'd always told people, so after she'd been in there for about, I think it was a year and a half, and she nearly raised enough money for her husband to come, she got word from home that her husband had died. And she'd always told people in Berlin that he died of a heart attack. Actually, he died of tuberculosis, which was seen as a kind of shameful disease of poverty at the time. That's when Tanya told Nuria something she never talked about. She had come to Kotti when she was even younger, when she was 15. And she came because she lived in a middle-class family and they hated that she loved punk, so they threw her out. And she made her way to Kotti to a squat, and a few months later she got pregnant. Tanya and Nuria realized they had both been children with children of their own in this place they didn't understand. They became great friends. And these kind of weird pairings were happening all over Kotti. There was this young Turkish-German lad called Mehmet who was doing really badly at school. They said he had ADHD. They said they were going to throw him out. And he got paired with this super grumpy old white German guy called Dieter, who said he didn't believe in direct action because he loved Stalin. In this case, he would make an exception. And when they sat together, Dieter started helping Mehmet with his homework. He started to do much better at school. Directly opposite Kotti, there's a gay club called Zudblock, run by a man I love called Richard Stein. And it's a pretty hardcore gay club. To give you a sense of what it's like, the previous place he owned was called Cafe Anal. I always think you wouldn't want to have a sandwich from Cafe Anal. And when they had opened Zudblock about 6 months before the protests began at Kotti, some people were really pissed off. There's a lot of very religious Muslims in this neighborhood. People smashed their windows. They were really angry. And when the protests began, Zudblock and all the gay people who worked there started giving all their furniture to make the barricade. And after the protests had been going on for a few months, they said to everyone, you guys should come and have your meetings in our club, right? We'll give you free food and drinks. And even the kind of progressive lefty type people at Kotti were like, look, we're not going to be able to persuade these very religious Muslims to come and have meetings in this super gay club, right? We're not going to be able to do it. But it did start to happen. I remember one of the Turkish German women there, Neriman Tanker, saying to me, we all realized we had to take these small steps to understand each other if we were going to work together and succeed. After the protests had been going on for 9 months, by this time, the barricade they had built was like a really nice structure with a roof and walls because they're construction workers, a lot of the people who work there, who live there. A guy showed up one day called Tunkai. And Tunkai, it's clear when you meet him, he's got some kind of cognitive difficulties. I think he was 51 at the time, and he'd been living homeless. But Tunkai has an incredible energy about him. He's really loving and warm and very funny. And he likes hugging people. And after he'd been hanging around for a few weeks, they realized he was homeless. The people who lived there, and he was one of the people who united the gays, the punks, and the Muslims. Everyone loved Tunkai, right? So they said to him, you should come and live in this thing we've built. We don't want you to be homeless. Come live here. So Tunkai moved in and he became a much loved part of the Kotti protest. And after he'd been there for, I think it was nearly a year, one day the police would come and inspect. One day the police came to inspect. They would do this every now and then. And Tunkai doesn't like it when people argue, and he thought the police were arguing. So he went to try to hug one of the police officers, but they thought he was attacking them, so they arrested him. And that was when it was discovered that Tunkai had been shut away in a psychiatric hospital for nearly 20 years, often literally in a padded cell. Hardly anyone ever came to see him. And he had escaped one day. He was living on the streets for a while, and he made his way to Kotti. So the police took him back to this psychiatric hospital at the other side of Berlin in Charlottenburg. At which point, the entire Kotti protest turned into a free Tonkai movement, right? They descended on this psychiatric hospital at the other side of Berlin. And I remember these psychiatrists being like, what is this? They've got this person they had shut away for 20 years who no one cared about. And suddenly they've got these very camp gay men, these women in hijabs, and these punks demanding his release, right? But I remember one of the protesters, a wonderful person named Uli Hartmann, saying to them, but the thing is, you don't love him. He doesn't belong with you. We love him. He belongs with us. And the psychiatrists were like, oh, what, you want to look after him? And they were like, no, he looks after us. Many things happened at Kotti. They got Tonkai back. He lives there still. They got a rent freeze for their entire housing project. They launched a referendum initiative to keep rents down across the whole of Berlin. It got the largest number of written signatures in the history of Germany. They then won and introduced a rent freeze, which is now being challenged in the German courts. But I remember the last time I saw Nuria, the woman who started all this by putting the sign in her window, I remember her saying to me, you know, I'm really glad I got to stay in my apartment. That's lovely. I gained so much more than that. I was surrounded by these extraordinary people all along, and I would never have known. And I think you can tell that I really love the people in Kotti, but they are not exceptional people, except in one way, which is that they listened to each other. They heard each other's cries of distress and acted. I remember Tanya, the punk squatter, Tanya said to me once, when you're all alone and you feel like shit, you think there's something wrong with you. But what we did is we came out of our corner crying and we started to fight. And we realized we were surrounded by people who felt the same way. And to me, that is the core message of everything I learned. Come out of your corner crying and start to fight. And I remember Neriman, one of the other Turkish German women, she said to me once that she said, when I grew up in Turkey, I grew up in a village. And I called my whole village home. And then I came to live in the Western world, and I learned that what you're meant to call home here is just your four walls, and if you're lucky, your family. But then she said this whole protest began, and I started to think of all these people and this whole place as my home. And she said she realized in some sense in this culture we are homeless. Because, you know, I'm going beyond what Nuria said now, but you need to feel you belong.
Yeah.
And our sense of home is not big enough for our sense of belonging. You know, there's a brilliant Bosnian writer called Alexander Heyman who said, home is where people notice when you're not there. And I remember thinking about Tonkai, right? When that happened, how many of us, if someone carried us away to a psychiatric hospital, would have dozens and dozens of people demanding our release, right?
Right.
Not many, if we're honest, right? So what they did is they rebuilt a tribe and they fought for something meaningful. And that's what we all need to do. It won't have exactly the same model as Kotti. Maybe you're watching and you have different fights in different ways and different problems, but that deep need to, the book is called Lost Connections, because we have lost our connections to each other, to the things that matter, to security, to a stable sense of the future. But we can rebuild all those things. We can rebuild them together. The people at Kotti rebuilt them. We can rebuild those things together. It's absolutely within our power to do that, but you've got to come out of your corner crying and start to fight.
There's the song title.
I should go in like 5 minutes if that's all right.
Yeah. No, that's
Right.
Such a beautiful.
I think the people in Kotti think that I'm slightly deranged because I would show up every few months and just cry and then leave Berlin again. And I think they just think, oh, who's this weird British guy who just turns up and cries every time he speaks to us? But yeah.
Did you make it into it should be a movie. Did you make it into a book or a story?
The story's in the book, but yeah, we've various people have contacted me about that. One of my books was made into a film, but not this one yet.
Great storyteller. It was really powerful.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. They're such great people. I love them. They're so funny as well. They're also very German and restrained in a way that I really like. They're like, they would just kind of go. One time I was crying at what they said, and Sandy said to me, Johan, I think maybe you have allergies. Your eyes water a lot. I was like, no, it's just really moving. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all these perspectives and stories. It's definitely, it's really beautiful to hear it.
Hooray! I'm really excited to hear your song.
Yeah, fun to find an angle for it in song. There's so much. So thank you.
This will be the second song I've inspired in my life. The first one is a
good.
bad song that one of my exes wrote about me.
We'll try and be polite.
Exactly, it was a breakup song, so this will be a happier song than the other song that I inspired, I think.
Oh, thanks so
Hooray!
much.
How long is it going to take you guys?
It's hard to tell with the song sometimes, but I have a feeling I'll just listen back to this sometime this week and pull more specific notes, and then probably not too long. I don't know.
Oh,
We'll never know.
exciting! Brilliant.
Faster than a movie, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else I can do to help, let me know. I'm really moved by this, and I'm also meant to say on my publisher's taser me that anyone who wants to know where they can get the audiobook or the physical book or the ebook of the book can go to the book's website is thelostconnections.com, and you can also want to know about my other books. It's johannhari.com. Hooray! I'm going to have even more caffeine now because I've got to do some more stuff today. But thank you both so much. Hooray!
Thanks so much, Johan. Been great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a great night. Cheers.
You too. Bye.
Jack. Cheers, Corey. Bye. Thank you. Cheers.
Well, that went well.
Yeah, that was awesome. What a cool
Yeah,
day.
Great. I was tearing up over that story. That was really
Yeah. I remembered that from the book. That's cool.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
cool. So, yeah, I would there was a moment where I wanted to like grab a piece of paper and write notes, but I didn't want to not be fully paying attention. So is it possible to
Sure. I'll send it back.
the recorded version back, and I'll take a listen to it this week and kind of
Yeah.
see what starts going. And yeah, I'd love to work on it together. So
Right. Yeah. There
for
were these themes that kept coming back in there. I mean, also from our conversation before, about there was death kept coming in quite a lot.
yeah, there's definitely some obvious starting points. I even had little lines starting to form in my head, but I'm like, just wait, don't
Yeah.
focus now. It'll come later.
Yeah. And that
Adjust it.
it was really, that home is come out of your corner crying and
Yeah.
start to fight. Because when they make the movie, you can have the song.
There we go.
There
Yeah.
you go. Get in there before he's written the screenplay. Before.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. No, but there's many directions you could go in, and
Yeah. So how often are you doing these now? Are you working with a lot of other songwriters, or is it what's
I tend to do them in bulk. Like I think I've got 7 interviews in December, and then we release every 2 episodes a month.
Okay.
So every 2 weeks. I want to get up to an episode every week, but I just need to get more artists interested because it's quite difficult to get the artists and then convince the record company and the publisher and then find their guest. It's quite a process, So
yeah,
if you know anyone else interested, please.
Yeah, I'll definitely once I'm done too, I'll post about it.
Yeah, great. It's also hard to explain the concept, So I come on and I write a song. You take one of my songs and you give it to a guest, and nobody gets it, So
Yeah, it's a great concept though. I think so often. So I was just talking about this. I've got a friend in town that we were talking about songwriting. He's here to make a record with me, and just the way songs take so much life and distill it into 3 minutes and such a power. It actually kind of came from, we were talking about homeopathic medicine, which is like,
Oh, yeah, of
if you have
course.
you have lead poisoning, right? It's just this incredible distillation of lead with water that becomes medicine. It's like the same way, like you go through 10 years of grief about something, and then it makes its way into this 3-minute song. And something about the structure of music and songwriting can take your 10 years of suffering and make it medicine for thousands and millions of people if they happen to hear it. So, you know, just, it's so cool to think about a book like that was, you know, worked its way in me and had its, I should have found my copy and thumbed through it a little better before I asked questions, but that's, you know.
No, it ties in. You know, I mean, like, because I wouldn't have got the, you know, seems like an obvious idea, this podcast about, you know, interview people and write a song, and then, but nobody's done it before. But I kind of came at it from the angle of service to others. And that's kind of like, that's also what you're doing, and also what, you know, Johann's doing, but also what the cure to loneliness is community. And once you're in a community, that's automatically service to others, because there's some, you know, if you're a homeless guy in Kotti, you've got nothing to give, but you've got your time and your love and your attention. And so you get these ideas once you come out of depression, once you're in service to others. So not that, you know, not that loneliness is selfishness, but once you come to that realization, then you get ideas and you get a purpose in life, and you know, you do like what you're doing. And so it solves all your problems once you just turn the camera the other way around.
That's it. That's it. Well, thank you. I feel like we could chat for another hour, but but just shoot me that when you can, and I'll get to work. And it makes me want to. I really. We're not even halfway through the process, I guess. But
yeah, exactly. The song appears magically once we press end, but we put a whole process together now. So
I'm sure that I could definitely come up with some other people that I would love to talk to as well. So,
brilliant! Well, I'd love to do another episode with you.
It'd be fun. Keep working. So, thank you for your persistence and for all you're doing. It's beautiful.
No worries. So, thank you. Likewise.
I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Bye, Corey.
Later, Jack. I'm sad today, but I don't need a pill to make it go away. It's not my brain. There's a bigger story to why I'm not okay. Home should be the place where people notice you're not there. Sanity's having a few friends that I can share my burdens with. Plant a garden with. Please believe that the world is a safe place for you. Everyone feels the same way too. Still something's lost. Society is disconnected from the heart. It's no one's fault. Instead of pointing fingers, could we open up our arms? Together we'll remember that we're more than just our thoughts. Depression is a chasm that you cannot crawl across all by yourself. If you need some help,
is real, and everyone feels the same way too. Yeah, they do. Home should be the place where people notice you're not there. Sanity is having a few friends that I could share my burdens with, plant a garden with.
Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed the song and the episode. The song will be released next week. Will be available on all streaming platforms, but you can already pre-save. Please support the artists by following them on social media and adding the song to any playlists you have. This is a completely free show, and you've listened this far, so I'd really appreciate it if you could pay us back by clicking like and subscribe. And follow at Podsongs on social media platforms, or subscribe to the newsletter at podsongs.com for special updates. Or just tell the next person you see about this amazing show where musicians interview their idols and write a song about them. The songs are available for download from the Podsongs website as well, which pays a lot more than the 0.00 whatever we get from Spotify. You can also email me at jack@podsongs.com to give feedback, suggest an artist and guest combos you'd like to hear, or just say hello. We're a listener-supported show, and I'd love to hear from you. A final thanks to my researchers, Dori Verbo and Rosa Marino, my producer, Maurizio Sanicola of Goldmine Records, and musicians Massimino Vozza and Luigi Falcione. The next episode will be out soon. In the meantime, you can listen to more amazing episodes in the archives. Until then, have a great day.